Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Digital Equity Webinar Series. Today's series, or session rather, is on using AI to foster critical thinking about bias, ethics, and data. My name is Quiana Bannerman, and I'm the director of the Maryland Center for Computing Education, and I will be your host for this session. So first, we're going to have our introductions. We're going to have our guest speaker. So I'm going to ask Caleb Wilson to go ahead and introduce himself.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm Caleb Wilson. I'm currently a district technology coach for Worcester Public Schools. I'm formerly a 7th and 8th grade secondary science teacher, and really excited to share and to work with you all. I've really enjoyed the series and really honored and humbled to get to be a part of it. So I'm really excited to talk to everybody today.
Thank you, Caleb. All right, and our next person who's going to introduce themselves is one of our guest panelists. So Charlotte Avery.
Hello, everyone. My name is Charlotte Avery. I'm the Program Impact Manager for two institutes at the University of Maryland. One is related to Trustworthy AI in Law and Society, and the other one is an interdisciplinary institute where we're trying to get everybody on campus involved with AI. I am a former classroom teacher, former computer educator, and have been involved with these things for a few years now, and I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you, Charlotte. And for our next guest panelist, Mr. Ron Nicholson.
Good afternoon. My name is Ron Nicholson. I'm one of the co-founders, and currently serve as executive director for Because I Can. We're a 501c3 nonprofit that teaches STEM education, primarily in Prince George's County, grades K through 12. We also are a member of the AI task force for the county. We also teach, and we have AI curriculum for middle school and for high school. So we're a big proponent and advocate for AI in the communities that we serve. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you, Ron. Okay, so now we will have our guest presentation.
I am. Can I use your slides if that's all right?
Okay, I just changed the settings for you, Caleb, so you should be able to present, to share, see if you can do it. If you can do that, if not.
Let's see if this works. It's saying, I just got a new MacBook, so I think it's asking me for permission, so it's gonna make me leave and then come back. So I'm just gonna use your slides so I don't disappear on everybody.
No problem. Okay, give me one moment.
No worries. No worries. Perfect. So all those are coming up. Awesome. So I was really excited to get to talk about bias and ethics and data surrounding AI, because I think this is a really, really awesome time to be into AI and talking about AI, because there's so many things that we can learn, especially when we center our view surrounding kind of like these issues. I think, and Quiana knows this about me, I tend to get caught up in all the awesome stuff that AI can do and sometimes have to slow down and kind of think critically about all of the risks and benefits and weigh them out to make sure we're using them ethically and properly. So I'm excited to talk about it today, and we're going to jump right into it. And you can go. I don't know how to tell you to go, but yeah, thumbs up, or I'll do something. So just a little bit about me. I'm not going to dive in too much. Yes, I work for Worcester County Public Schools, but I've also had the honor to work for the Maryland Center for Computing Education and teaching and supporting them in spreading AI awareness and how to use AI in education. And what I love about MCCE is we center everything around ethics. So as exciting as AI is, we don't always jump straight to here are all the awesome things it can do. We teach those things in the framework of thinking about, hey, how do we use this responsibly? How do we use this ethically? And we center everything around that. So I'm not going to jump into all the things I've done. main thing about me is I'm a hobbyist. I love all sorts of different hobbies. I jumped into 3D printing and kind of went down a rabbit hole and started a business doing 3D printing. And then my attention focused to AI, and I kind of dove into that just as hard. So now I'm big into AI and doing things in our district and working with MCCE. So that's kind of all you need to know. I don't have an expertise in AI. I'm a chemistry background is and education is my background. So AI was just something that interested me and just dove into it. So I'm excited to share some of that knowledge. So just to give you a quick rundown of what I want to talk about, I'm going to do an AI refresh just to make sure we all are on the same page about what AI is, how it works. I'm going to try to make that like less than 5 minutes, because I know we've heard that a couple times during the seminar, but I did want to make sure we talked about it for anyone who's new. Then I'm going to kind of hit a couple of different ethics topics. I want to say really quickly, I think we could teach a whole course, and we do teach a whole course on this, and these could be separate courses or nights each, but just to kind of make you aware of some of the different pieces of ethics that play a part. So we're going to talk about data and bias and equity and access, good pedagogy or how we're supposed to be using AI, and then obviously getting into deep fakes and AI literacy, and then really starting to think about how can we prepare for all of this and take all these challenges in stride and do something with them. So first thing, all AI is, at the end of the day, and you can skip 2 slides ahead if you want. Perfect. You can do, yep, there we go. All AI is really getting machines to do human things. So I left the original slide in with all the extra information, and I know Quiana's going to make the slides available for you all, so you can check that out. But basically, we're just getting machines to do things that humans can do: see, speak, read, write, code, a lot of those different things. So that's what artificial intelligence is in a nutshell. And then same thing, we can talk about how it works. There we go. We can talk about how it works, and I'll give you one more thumbs up to go to the next part that summarizes this. We can talk about how it works, but basically these machines are taking vast amounts of data. They're applying some algorithms, using some mathematics, using some probabilities to just make some decisions. A lot of times they're making outputs, they're making predictions. In our case, we're going to talk about next is generative AI. They're generating some things, they're making new things, but basically they're taking data, they're applying some programming, some algorithms, and then they're doing something with those outputs. So again, generative AI, that's the new piece that we've all been dealing with for the last 2 years. It's basically where AI is taking all that data and it's generating something entirely new based on that information, which is why we call it generative AI. So now we have tools that can generate music, that can generate podcasts, that can generate text, speech, videos, PowerPoints, code. A new release is whole playable worlds, interactive worlds, where you can give it a picture and it'll let you interact with it with your keyboard and walk around it as if it's a video game. All of that is the new piece of AI, where they've taken that data and now they're able to extrapolate and use that data to generate brand new things. So if we think about data for a second, the original ChatGPT model, and I'm going to use ChatGPT as kind of the model we talk about for most of this, it was trained on a ton of data from the internet. It was scraped from web pages, books, and articles. And as of right now, up to October 2023. And now they are even connected to the internet. A lot of these models are connected to the internet, so they can research on even more things that are happening live. But basically, it was given all of this data, and it was able to analyze that data and start to make some predictions about what the next sentence should be if it's finishing a sentence, or what the picture should be if it's finishing a picture. But it's basically taking all of that data, again, running those algorithms, running those programs to determine what's going to come next. So the powerful thing about this is, a lot of these models have way more information inside of them than we're ever going to be able to ingest in our lifetimes. So they're extremely smart. We're now getting models that, if you haven't checked out OpenAI's website, they're doing their 12 days of releases. Today's day 2. Yesterday, they just released a model that is smarter than PhD level academia. So they're able to answer PhD level questions. They're using it for medical research, and it's way smarter now than the average human, which we knew is only a matter of time. So thinking about that, they have access to all of this data ever, which is super powerful, all of this knowledge ever. So that's where we're going to kind of start our first our first piece of this ethics conversation. So data and bias. So again, one of the things that I struggle with is getting so focused on the awesome stuff it can do. So these are some articles that that have been out that just show the power of these tools. So over to the far left, there's research now that's showing that special education teachers accompanied with ChatGPT are able to write IEP goals way better than not using the technology. And that's just showing how our human expertise coupled with ChatGPT, these large language models can help us be more efficient and help us even write better goals. Obviously, making sure they do that properly with privacy and things like that are important. But again, just showing how powerful these tools are combined with our expertise. The top example is from Nature, the Nature journal article, and Google DeepMind just released a model that is able to predict weather up to 15 days in advance. That is about 95, I think, % accurate, they said. So way better models than we have for finding floods, weather patterns, anything like that. Well in advance, 2 weeks, almost 2 weeks in advance before they happen. So that's a brand I think that's like this month old, brand new. Down at the bottom, we have ChatGPT's advanced voice mode. Initially, when that came out, I wasn't sure what I was going to use it for, but I found myself and the folks in our district using it for translation. You can turn on voice mode. You can say, hey, I want you to just translate from Spanish to English. Don't add anything else. Don't change it. Just word for word translate from English to Spanish and back and forth. And I can set that down between me and a Spanish speaking person, and we can have a conversation through that app. Again, technology that didn't exist before and is able to do that because it's been trained on so much awesome data. And then at the far right, this is one that I'm really excited about. My wife is a medical professional, and it's research that shows that ChatGPT just by itself, they just use ChatGPT, is able to diagnose more accurately and more thoroughly medical conditions than doctors powered with ChatGPT or doctors by themselves, which is a really interesting statement. So a doctor with ChatGPT actually scored less than just ChatGPT by itself diagnosing medical issues. And there's a lot of science behind that, why that is, and psychology around how doctors think and things like that. But the reason I highlight all of these things is because these are such big advancements that now these models are in our hands and we have access to all the best information ever. We have access to vast amounts of information that we can use to do all sorts of different things in our expertise, in our professional lives, in our personal lives, from doing things for work, doing things for recipes, whatever you want to do. We now have access to all of this information, but we have to understand that the data that it was trained on is not always perfect. I'll give you the thumbs up for that next slide. So what I mean by that is there's data bias that are built into these systems because the world we live in is biased. The data that's on the internet that it was trained on is biased. And these are just some examples of bias that creeps in. So the top one is a picture of Tesla. And basically Tesla's, long story short, they don't drive well in places where people can't afford Teslas. So Teslas, as they drive, they collect information from the cameras and sensors and things like that. And where people own Teslas is where they're able to collect data from. So obviously in those areas, they're going to drive better. That's an example of data bias. The example at the bottom is what's called survivorship bias. Basically, in World War II, planes were coming back and they were mapping where these planes were hit by bullets from flak guns. And they were mapping and saying like, hey, these are the places we need to reinforce on the planes because this is where they're getting hit the most. And what they found out, it's actually the opposite. They're only counting the planes that made it back. But in reality, we need to reinforce the places where those bullet holes aren't, because those planes got hit in those places, didn't make it back to be counted. And that's the example of what's called survivorship bias. And I highlight those two examples because those aren't intentional forms of bias. Our world is biased either through intentional, which is unfortunate, and unintentional, which just gets into our data by accident, essentially. But the reality is all of these models are trained on that data, trained on that bias, and that bias has crept into these models. And it's something we need to be aware of, because as we use these tools, we need to recognize when there are bias outputs. And again, a lot of them are unintentional, just through data collection, through training, through things like that. And some of them, unfortunately, are intentional and could be used maliciously. But the reality is they still affect us in the same ways. So the last picture I have here is a little boy on a tricycle. And this was a very really, really powerful article that I read where a teacher was using ChatGPT and they were generating an image. And they asked it to generate an image of a boy on a bicycle, and it generated a little white boy on a bicycle in a neighborhood. And the neighborhood was, houses and there were street lamps and fences and stuff like that. And it was just a little boy on a tricycle. And then she changed one thing in the prompt. She put little black boy on a bicycle. And what she noticed is not only did it put a little black boy on a bicycle, but the entire environment behind changed. The houses were run down. There was graffiti on the walls. The gates that were open in the first image were now closed. And what that tells us is there's bias in these systems that's going to cause a huge issue as we start getting kids to generate images, as we start getting kids to use them, as we start using these tools for different purposes. We need to be aware that those biases exist so we can address it. And again, it's important to be made aware of these biases that they exist. I don't think we're going to necessarily be able to solve them. I know we're going to talk a little bit about that after the presentation, but just understanding that they're there. And that's such a powerful article that it talks about. I'm showing how that bias can creep in. And that's just a simple image generation. So next topic that I kind of wanted to hit on kind of falls into the same realm, which is equity and access. So this is a quick video, and you can hit play. All this is I asked ChatGPT to create a song, the lyrics to "Thank God I'm a Country Boy" about cells. I think it was for my kids. They're just obsessed with "Thank God I'm a Country Boy," so I kind of asked it to kind of make lyrics for that song, singing about cell parts or something like that, because I was a former science teacher. And then, you can play it. It's not going to sing. I think it's just text. Hopefully it's just text. I didn't sing it, I promise. But it's just a really, really amazing tool that can do some really, really amazing things. Obviously, there are tools out there that can play that song, that could generate that song and sing it. That could do all sorts of different things. And again, it's just gonna let this pop up real quick so we can take a look at it. So write me the lyrics to the tune of "Thank God I'm a Country Boy" that are about cell parts. And then it did it. Again, that's awesome that it can do that. I find myself being more and more surprised about what these tools can do. Just a really silly one. And again, it's just there. I promise I won't sing it. But you can go ahead to the next slide, because it's not the most important thing, I promise. But all of these tools, this is just a snapshot of a lot of the different tools that exist, and this is nowhere even close to exhaustive. But there's Microsoft Copilot, ChatGPT, Anthropic's Claude, Google Gemini, there's Inflection's Pi AI, there's Characters AI, there's all sorts of tools now. And again, we're living in a space now where there's so many tools everyone has access to. ChatGPT is now free. There's a free version that you can access some of the most powerful models to do different things with. And again, you can go to the next part. This is just a pop-up saying this slide is now outdated as of yesterday. So I've given up trying to update these because so many new things come out. But what this begs to differ is, does everyone truly have access? So what I mean by that is I always talk about, I always think about my kids. My two kids are going to grow up in a household that their dad is knowledgeable, their dad pays for the tools, and I'm going to teach them how to use the tools. And what I think about for my school district that I work in is that's not everyone's reality, right? Not everyone has access to the best tools. And even if they do have access, do they have knowledge of how those tools work to use them properly? And then if they do have that access, do they understand the ethics and the bias piece of it, the AI literacy piece of it, to be able to recognize when they should be using it, when they shouldn't be using it? And then last but not least, that paywall gap. And for the first time since actually yesterday, I'm now outside of that paywall gap. OpenAI just released a new model that's $200 a month that I can't afford. I'm outside of that pay gap, and that has created a gap in my life that, like, again, I'm privileged to be able to afford the $20 a month, but now that gap is even wider for some people to have access to the best quality. So if we're just talking about just getting the tools in hands, that access isn't everywhere for every student. And we saw this again with the internet. Not every student had connection during COVID, and that was an issue, or had a device to access their education. And now that we're starting to see those divides start creating an AI divide. And then if we continue that on, not all these tools are accessible. Not all of these tools have built-in screen readers. Not all these tools have ways that students with disabilities or people with disabilities can access them. And again, we have parents that are learning this, that are trying to be caught up in this. I'm just a technology coach that just was interested in this, but not every parent, my wife is not really interested in this. So, not every parent is knowledgeable. Not every parent is excited about this as I am. And the same thing can be said for teachers. So when we start thinking about teachers, there's a whole lot of training that needs to go into teaching how to use these properly and how to create these classroom experiences. And what I'm noticing in my county is, and this is true for any technology, you have the early adopters and you have the people that are slower to jump on board. Those experiences in those classrooms between an early adopter and somebody who might be a late adopter are going to be vastly different for our students. And that again is affecting access. I've teachers in our district that are using AI image generators for text support and for all these other different instructional practices that are enriching their classroom that other students in the same exact school building, just one classroom over, aren't getting. And that is an access issue. So then if we think about that, if we think about these classrooms, it brings into another concern of mine, which is, you can go ahead. Yep. Is good pedagogy. What does good AI use in the classroom actually look like? And I know you've all probably seen these tools, and these are wonderful tools. I'm not paid to tell you anything good or bad about them, but Magic School, Diffit, Quizlet, there's tons of platforms that are built for educators. And one of the things that concerns me is, as teachers are using these tools and they're making lesson plans, they're making IEPs, they're leveling text, they're doing all of these things. Number one, is it actually saving time? And number two is, how are they using them? So looking at or breaking this down, what is good pedagogy? We as experienced educators, if you've taught for a long time, especially before AI, we remember going through our teacher preparation programs, writing lesson plan after lesson plan after lesson plan, and learning the foundational learning principles that those lesson plans are grounded in. And then once we got into the classroom, we knew that a lesson planned online wouldn't just be copy and pasted into our classroom. We knew that it had to be adapted for the students that are in the room. And we had to understand what happened when we taught a good lesson and when we didn't teach a good lesson. And my question is, does AI know that? Does AI have that experience? And I would argue, no, it doesn't, because it's not in the room with your students. So again, when we think about good pedagogy, if AI develops a lesson plan for me, is that actually a good lesson plan? And what I'm worried about is our teacher preparation programs. As a college student, if I went back to college and had AI, I probably wouldn't have learned as much or as deeply, I'll say, because if I got AI to develop a lesson plan, I didn't really understand all the different parts of that lesson plan and why I chose them, or I don't understand why AI chose them and whether they would be sound pedagogy. So again, when we start thinking about integrating this into our classrooms, if we're getting recommendations from AI, is that sound pedagogy? And then when we think about, again, using AI for other teaching tasks, grading, feedback, decision-making, number one, should we be doing those things? And then we start to think about students using it in the classroom. And one of my biggest fears that I always talk about with teachers is there's a really big fear of an AI teaching and learning loop, where a teacher creates an assignment using AI, gives it to a student, the student completes that assignment using AI, turns it in, teacher grades that assignment and gives feedback using AI. And then there were no humans involved in that process at all. We've taken the human, the relationship, the most important part of education, arguably, out of the teaching and learning process. And so what that calls us to do, or what that is going to hopefully push us to do, is start thinking about how do we change our assessment practices and our teaching practices to utilize AI to, number one, keep the relationship in the middle of the conversation or in teaching, but also to ensure that people are learning. So again, that's a good concern, or a big concern for me is what does that good pedagogy look like in a world of AI? So again, there are some amazing ways that teachers are using teachers are using AI in the classroom. And one of those ways that I did actually was nothing related to AI. I was teaching students how to do podcasting. And there was actually a student in the class who was selective mute. And for whatever reason, obviously they didn't want to do the podcast because they didn't want to speak. And that's not my place to say whether they're right or wrong about that. But what I did is I found a program online that I took their script for their podcast and put it into this program. They chose a fake voice, and it gave them audio so they could edit their podcast. And what was powerful about this is their podcast was about what's an issue that you would take a stand for. And I thought, like, hey, you have such good information that you've written down. It would really be awesome to hear you talk about it. But that student didn't want to. But using AI, they were actually given a voice to edit the podcast, to kind of put it into GarageBand on their iPad and kind of make some edits to it, but to essentially get their message out. And that's such a powerful piece of, like, hey, that student got a voice because of AI. And there's all sorts of stories of people who are losing their voices, who've been able to clone their voice using AI so they can still talk and practice and do things. And then another example is students in our district are using text evidence to have pictures generated by AI. And then they're learning that, oh man, I forgot some specific examples because they're not in this picture, that forces them to go back in the text and find that text evidence. And so we're seeing a lot of really interesting ways and engaging ways to use that in literacy in ELA. But what concerns me, and what concerns you all as well, is our deep fakes. So you can go to the next slide, please. Yep. So deep fakes and plagiarism, right? So the first part of this is, how do we verify information? And I got into an interesting conversation a couple of weeks ago where someone asked me, what's a photograph? In a world of AI and AI generated images, what is a photograph now? What is a picture? How do we verify that that's a real photo? Like, what makes something I took on my phone different than something I just generated using AI? And that's a really hard conversation I don't think I'm going to be able to answer. But there's a real concern about deepfakes, about cloning people's voices, using explicit photos of, or creating explicit photos of other people using their likenesses and their images. Those are huge issues that we need to be aware of. In our district, we have policies that we're addressing, both cyberbullying using AI, deepfakes with AI, and things like that. But how do we see a picture in the world and know that it's a real image? And then plagiarism, of course, that's always a big concern in education, that students are using these tools to just write essays and things like that. I mean, I put plagiarism in quotes because I think that's going to be something that we need to address as educators. If we're asking students to do things that AI can do, what's the benefit of it? Or if we're only asking them to do that, what's the benefit of it? I know there's foundational things they need to learn doing some practices. But what I think can address that issue is AI literacy, and making sure students understand that the image they may be looking at may not be real. And the two examples I have here, they're essentially quizzes, and this is all linked. So if you guys get the slides, you can click on every image. It's linked to the article or to the activity. But this is actually a quiz or a test so you can get an image and determine whether it's real or not. And there's an actual science behind determining whether an image is AI generated or not. There's things to look for, and that piece we need to teach to our students. And we need to teach them why it's important to not clone your voice or not clone someone else's voice, and the power in a voice and the power in being a human. I think there's a lot of pieces to that. So again, this is just highlighting a lot of these equity issues. I don't think I'm going to solve any of them today with you all. But the last piece is kind of what I'm thinking for our district is, how do we address this? And the way that we did this and the way I'm doing this in my own life with my own students is to really think about my AI use and my kids' AI use and what their future could look like. I'm teaching them the values of just being a human, the values of just being a good person, and trying to make sure they're aligning how they're using AI with those values, to kind of support and encourage and uphold those values. So in our district, for example, we have 6 core values that we have established that, hey, as long as we use AI within these values or aligned to these values, then we shouldn't run into deep fakes. We shouldn't run into plagiarism. We shouldn't run into other, pieces to this. And the last thing I'll kind of say, and then I'll stop talking so much. What we think about in our world today, the stuff that we're dealing with today probably won't be an issue 10 years down the road. There'll be other issues, of course, but we need to really think about the future in terms of our students' lives, right? I think about this, my kids, they're 2 and 4. What's the world going to look like in 3, 5, 18 years for them? And am I preparing them? Is my school district preparing them for that world? And I know it's really hard to do, is to focus on the future when you're trying to plan your lesson, or you're trying to, just make it through today and address the issues of today. But that's where we need to be thinking about, is just definitely down the road. And then also society. And I saw in the chat, people are asking about, electronic waste and how much energy these servers pull in, and all of that. Like, we need to be aware of those things, and teaching our kids and our students to address those pieces as well. How does AI affect the broader society? So again, I don't have all the answers, but I think a good start is just making sure that AI aligns with what we believe in and what we hold true to value. I think that's a really important piece. So other than that, I think that the last slide is just me saying thank you. Yeah, so thank you very much. I know a couple of people were asking for the link to the slide deck. It's now in the chat, but this QR code also links to all of my socials and information. If you need questions, or feel free to reach out. Also, the QR code on my face somewhere over here does that as well. And then all the slides and presentations are also found there as well. So wherever you want to get them from. But thank you all. I'm excited to kind of hear the other panelists' ideas and stuff about some of these issues. But thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Caleb, for that presentation. That was great. I'm pretty sure we all learned quite a bit. Okay, so now we're going to move on to our panel discussion. So we have Ms. Charlotte Avery, who's going to join Caleb, and then also Mr. Ron Nicholson. And so I'm going to start with the first question. So Ron, this question is for you. How can we identify and mitigate bias in AI algorithms and data sets?
First of all, Caleb, great presentation and great question, Quiana. It's one of the things is making sure that we have a diverse group of developers that could come in and understand that, when they're developing, creating these tools, that more folks are at the table and have a conversation, have a lens. So sometimes you might not think you're being biased, but you are. And then also in data set and the collections of the data, making sure that's diverse as well. So it's kind of twofold. And I think if we can get to a point where we have those working together, I think we can, hopefully limit the amount of the disparities and inequities and the biases that we see.
Thank you for your answer, Ron. All right, so moving on to our next question, and Caleb, this question is for you. What are some examples of biased outcomes in AI applications, and how could they impact individuals or groups?
So some things that I've seen, number one, image generators are the first thing that comes to mind, because in science, I always thought about representation. I always thought about, what scientists am I showcasing in my classroom that makes sure they look like all the students in my classroom. So I found, like, when we were developing pictures just for that text evidence activity in the classroom, sometimes it would generate images of just all white people, white scientists, white doctors, and that's an issue, because that doesn't show representation. My wife is a female doctor. Like, that's not a majority in her field. And again, just like you said, we need to make sure that we're being representative. We need to make sure the data is representative, but also we need to make sure we're training students to recognize that, and then to also address it, in prompting and things like that. My bigger concern is when we start to integrate this into the systems part of education, where we're using it to align schedules and things like that, because it's going to pull this data and it's going to say, hey, these students have traditionally struggled in these classes, so we're not going to put them in those classes. Mm-hmm. And now that decision has impacted a student's whole life trajectory, which again causes this process to repeat itself. Yeah. Like, just like you said, every person I've ever seen who's a data scientist looks like me, and that's an issue. Once we change that, then we'll start to see these bigger changes. And I think a big piece of that is getting everyone on the same page about it, and angered and worried and advocating for that. And I don't think we did that with social media and the internet. And I think that's where some of these issues come from. So we need to do that, like, at the grassroots level now, and make sure we're making enough noise now while this is all early in development.
Thank you, Caleb, for your answer. Okay, Charlotte, this question is for you. How can we ensure that AI systems are designed to be fair and equitable for all individuals?
Again, thank you for having me on this panel, and thank you, Caleb, for such a great introduction and presentation. What's interesting about this question, the answer lies in a lot of what Ron and Caleb has said. Representation, transparency, having those voices that are historically omitted out of these conversations, such as our Black and Latina and Native American folks, women, people with disabilities, our representation from our LGBTQIA community, like having a diverse group of perspectives and voices sitting at the table. And we are in such an opportunistic time frame where it's still kind of early, even though AI is evolving rapidly. We're still kind of early to bring these voices to the table. I think that as far as like our AI systems, right now we are dealing with that at the University of Maryland, where we are trying to diversify our research teams. And so that we're not just looking at our typical computer scientists or technologists that are creating the research, but we are going interdisciplinary, and we're being intentional about that because our arts and humanities instructors, our educators, our business management, our geologists are all trying to grapple with AI in general and creating curriculum for their students. And so intentionally, even at the university level, like I would say, even if we're looking at Carnegie Mellon and the Stanfords and UPenn and other institutions like NCA&T, like all of our institutions across the US are trying to get people from interdisciplinary backgrounds in the conversation, because that is going to make a difference. AI is filtering across content areas, across disciplines, and it's kind of boundless in a sense. And so I think that is one way that we need to start addressing that. And I think by having those voices, it will filter into being able to audit bias and looking at our systems and looking at the data, as Ron said, and I love how Caleb added this point about there is intentional bias and unintentional bias. And so really, really educating our students that are coming into this world and this marketplace, as well as trying to also look at those who are already existing in industry, who are already at the policy levels, who are making these decisions, and trying to also educate them in understanding how data is being interpreted and how there is harm in some of this data interpretation, and trying to identify those areas where it is intentional and unintentional bias that is being expressed. And lastly, I would just say, like, we definitely need to get into some way or form in either standards, accountability, some kind of evaluation or assessment moving forward. And unfortunately, this technology, as well as some of the other emerging technology that exists, is just evolving rapidly than anything else that we have had to deal with. And therefore, as humans, we need to start to move a lot faster in how we are addressing. We may not, we cannot take 2 years on a committee, an AI policy committee, to come up with a policy and then practice it and go through all of these stages that we normally do. We have to be more efficient. And because in 2 years, this technology is going to look different.
Thank you, Charlotte, for your answer. Okay, Caleb, what are your thoughts on that? How can we ensure that AI systems are designed to be fair and equitable for all individuals?
I think in the short term, what really needs to happen is there needs to be some legislation and guidance at the top levels. Because when I think about a small LEA, when I think about like my little world in Worcester County, as me as the person who reviews all these digital tools, I can't go to these multi-billion-dollar companies and say, hey, you need to fix this now. Like they don't need to listen to me. So it really needs to come top down. And I'd say the same, that helps with a lot of issues because teachers in the classroom don't I don't want to say I don't have time. This doesn't sound good when I say it that way, but they can't be the ones who are advocating for these big changes in the companies because they're just trying to teach. And that's not a part of their essentially their circle of influence. But I think one of the ways for the future is really making sure we educate our students about these biases and do that again with our students because they're going to be the ones developing the next models and the next future tools. And one of the things that I thought was really powerful, we talked about a lot about image generation bias in the classroom and then working with teachers and explaining like, hey, you need to be aware of this if you're going to use these tools. And what I found was really powerful, one of the teachers said, it's really easy to talk about bias in a system, in a machine, because the machine's flawed. The machine's broken, the data's biased. Like this model isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing. It's so much harder to have that conversation about a person or about yourself. And I thought that was really, really powerful because that could be a doorway to talking about bias in general. Hey, yeah, this system's data is biased. It's a flawed system and it's causing this. But that could open up so many more conversations about the biases we have, myself having, the privileges I have. It makes it easier to talk about me when I can direct that at a machine first. So I think it's a really unique opportunity to also take what is a challenge for us and hopefully use that to kind of start some more conversations about, hey, let's be honest, the reality is not every kid has the same, opportunities as everyone else in the classroom. Not every adult has those same opportunities. And if we educate ourselves and others from that frame, then I think it makes it easier to raise some voices and to unite about some of these issues. Because I know I saw in the chat, the backlash about DEI and things like that. Like, I think this is an opportunity to kind of use that. Like, hey, AI is flawed and biased, and it's representing some of the same biases that exist in our society. Let's aim that at the tool first, and then that can open some more conversations about our biases as humans as well.
Thank you, Caleb, for your answer. Now let's talk a little bit about ethical implications of AI. Sharon, this question is for you. What ethical considerations should be taken into account when developing and deploying AI systems?
Well, we talked about fairness. We talked about transparency. I think that's one thing that you don't hear a lot about. How was these systems developed? What are they designed to do? So folks use these tools, and it's like Caleb mentioned, and Charlotte mentioned as well. They don't really know what this tool is generating, and they might take it as totally being 100% accurate in the output, without knowing, all the ins and outs of how those systems are developed. And so it's, I'm a long-time technologist, and being with a technology that's blazing without really regulation. So, and I've never been accustomed to that in my how many years I've been doing this. So there's a lot of challenges there, and I think it starts with accountability, making sure there's a level of fairness, and some transparency. And like Caleb mentioned, that's not going to happen overnight because now these companies, they've monetized this. OpenAI, any open system back in my day meant it was developers, it was free, it was never meant to be monetized. These two companies have monetized it, and so getting them to change now that Caleb just mentioned, now there's $200 now. That really concerns me. It really concerns me.
Thank you, Ron, for your answer. Okay, Charlotte, this question is for you. How can we ensure that AI is used for the benefit of humanity and not for harm?
So I think transparency is probably one of the answers that I will always have concerning this whole topic. But I want to lean a little bit more into what is actually taking place and in the development of these technologies. And the biggest thing, if we want to benefit humanity, we have to be human-centered. We have to be people first in our designing, in the research that we do, and how we educate our students, how we connect. And I think one piece that is missing, or has been traditionally missing, and this is Charlotte's opinion, is the relationship between our researchers, industry, and our community, AKA our schools, our library systems, our community leaders, our churches, our I think there is a relationship missing. And usually these groups are working in silos. As a teacher, I felt like I was on the front line, like you would have thought I was at war every day, trying to fight for my students, fight for their futures, trying to implement everything that was coming down the pipe from the state. When federal government, leadership would change, then whatever new thing came up. And so, and that feeling was also shared now that I'm at the university level. I'm seeing this with our researchers, like as if they're living in a world by themselves. And they're thinking that they are creating research and practices that is going to benefit everyone. When you think about industry, yes, they have profit as the bottom line, but there are some that are like, I know I'm doing something good. No one is talking to each other. No one. We're thinking that we're doing this with good intentions, but I think in order for us to be able to benefit humanity, all of these groups need to be working together. So when we're coming up with AI policies for education, we should have all of our stakeholders represented. That means even the students, right? And I would even go as far to say, you can put up a picture survey in your classroom for pre-K3 and ask them what are their thoughts about things. I have done some research myself dealing with student voice as it relates to AI. Our students are watching the news. Our students are paying attention when they're looking at podcasts and their TikTok feeds, and they're getting their information, and they are starting to create their own definitions of what they think AI is. And our researchers are just trying to make sense and push out information as fast as possible. I think that we are doing harm to our society, to our humanity by not having more participatory designing, where we are bringing all of our stakeholders to the table. They're being included from the designing, from the research, from even the corporate level or industry level. Like, we really need to start to get everybody at the table. I think that is one way that we can address some of the ethical issues, because people are going to pay attention. Like, I'm from Miramar, Florida. You can't tell me about my city. I know everything about my little city. And so if you want to help my city, why not add me as part of the conversation? The same thing, we're creating ed tech tools for students. How often have those ed tech tools said, wait, I wonder what a student might think about it. Let me ask them. And I mean, I think that's one big piece. So definitely fostering collaboration between all of these stakeholders is going to be important. But I also think if you are producing research and you're producing and you're seeing outcomes taking place, or you are collecting data, inform the community, inform the society, bring them into those town hall meetings. I am a member of Prince George's County. I remember when Monica Golson would hold these town hall meetings all throughout the pandemic for educators, for the teachers, and like those town hall meetings where people at least have a choice and they have a platform and a say is important and invaluable if you want to educate the public and have them feel like they're a part of what is taking place. I think that is one way to address those ethical issues, apart from regulation and accountability and stuff like that.
Thank you, Charlotte, for your answer. All right, Caleb, how can we ensure that AI is used for the benefit of humanity and not for harm?
I think one of the, like I said before, aligning it to our values. Really, we all have personal values that dictate whether we do good and do bad each day, right? And we live our lives according to some sort of rules and values. I think the same needs to be done for our AI use, and then that same set of values or core values also needs to apply to the companies developing tools. And I think it's already been said, but a lot of these companies do benchmarks to show how great their tools are, how smart they are, how fast they are, how they can code, how they can do all these things. Why don't we have benchmarks for bias? Why don't we have benchmarks for interexplainability of the algorithm? Why are there not benchmarks for those types of things that will have a societal impact? Yeah, I would love to see a benchmark showing how much energy your model saves and how much water it's conserving. You know, where are those benchmarks? And I think those conversations are tough conversations, number one. And I don't think they're conversations that are attractive in
Right.
terms of like financials. I don't think those are attractive in terms of legislation. I think if people actually knew how much energy and how much water and how taxing these things are on the environment, I don't think companies, would survive. I mean, for example, and I think this is, you know, this is interesting how many companies are reaching out, or AI companies are reaching out to nuclear power to do some of this stuff. Nuclear power is some of the best power, the most energy dense power that we have on the planet. And all of these companies all of a sudden are reaching out to use that energy. That tells us how much energy these things are pulling. But again, we're all not asking those questions. We're all not bringing those things up as a unified front. And again, it's great for Caleb Wilson and all of us to say that. But I can't hold a company to that. I can't, but collectively we all can. And I think that's where we really need to start, because I think once we have AI that is aligned with those things, if we value the environment, if we value equity and fairness, if we value all of those things, once the companies align with those values, then we'll start to see that good. And I guarantee there's going to be more issues in the future. There's going to be so many things that come out in the future as a result of AI. It's going to change the world. But like, if we're only focusing on the financials, if we're only focusing on those things that are attractive to put in our bottom line, we're gonna still have to deal with all those issues and more.
Thank you, Caleb. Now for our next question, how should society address the potential job displacement caused by AI advancements? So Ron, I'm gonna ask you to address that question first.
It's a really good question. Most of my work is done in the Title I/community school with those populations. And we talk about artificial intelligence, it's that big monster under the bed that's going to take jobs. So don't want to hear about it. So it's a real challenge to try to educate and expose students and adults to what AI is, what is it doing, and how it can be used for the good, and that it's not going away. And so I think education is important. Exposure is important as early as possible, educating students. I also think upskilling students so that they can have a lens at being an AI engineer or a data scientist or all these other career around artificial intelligence. There needs to be more advocacy for students that might be in situations or schools where either they don't have resources or teachers that can teach it. Where do they go? For me, it's a code red. I've got, I'm like the Bible preacher on the corner, shouting that we need to get folks exposed and educated, at least to understand what it is before you say, don't talk to me about it. I don't want to hear about it. It's bad news. It's going to take my job. We need to educate them, expose, and upskill the students as career paths. And so we can address some of those disparities and biases that we've mentioned in this meeting.
Thank you, Ron. Charlotte, what are your thoughts on this question? How should society address the potential job displacement caused by AI advancements?
So, not to rehash what Ron was saying, but to elaborate on the upskilling, I want to also add reskilling. There are there are folks that are in current positions that are concerned about their jobs.
Yeah.
And and I'm just going to put a plug in there for the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. They have a report out about artificial intelligence and the future of work. They have some really interesting recommendations about how we can create a career roadmap for those who are currently in, I would say, non-technical positions, and they're concerned about AI taking over their positions, and leaning a little bit more into this career roadmap where there's an actual idea of how these jobs can be evolved, or how the skills that they can have can, coupled with some other skills, can move them into other positions. And then and spending more time in our career and technical education, so that those CTE programs, and getting students certified.
Yeah.
And then lastly, human intelligence is not dead. If anything that we need to do, we need to start focusing and investing in building human intelligence. I don't think we have ever been asked forwardly in the past, like, oh, well, we're teaching students, right? No, what we are in the business of is building human intelligence, because it's our intelligence that truly powers this technology. And so the more that we can invest in that, I think that's where we can help mitigate and changing our lens as well. Maybe it's not displacement, maybe it's just a shift in job requirements. And so now, as a whole, we need to shift our mentality to say, how have job requirements evolved, and what can we do to prepare our students, versus thinking in a deficit of displacement, and we're losing and it's negative all the time.
Thank you, Charlotte. And Caleb, I'm going to ask you the very last question. What role do privacy and data protection play in the ethical use of AI?
So I've already started thinking about like my own students, or sorry, my own kids, and what information are my wife and I putting out there in on Facebook, on Instagram, and things like that. And I think one of the things we need to do better at, that my generation didn't do a great job of, is explaining to our students and our kids and anyone who'll listen the value of their data, the value of the decisions they make when they're online. Because that profile that someone has of you, of what you click on, what you buy, all of that data is required to have AI. So I want to start there. Like, that's all needed to have the amazing technology that we have. But that data is still important, and it's still a part of who I am. It's still a part of me. It's based, all that data is based on my human experience of things that I've done, things I believed in, things I've, interacted with. So I think we need to teach that value a lot more. And then I think, again, we need to start protecting that and holding companies to also valuing that as well. Because again, I always think of ed tech tools, it's my responsibility to like review them and how they're used and how they use data. A lot of these adaptive learning platforms, for example, aren't as good if they don't have access to our student data. So I think there's a piece that they need to have that to do certain things, to make certain decisions and recommendations and help, but to a point. And if we're not also valuing and protecting, both pieces at the same time, I think it can be exploited. I think we're going to see that soon, where you're going to get ads that are going to make you buy things that normally you probably wouldn't have been buying. And that's a scary piece, that they can use our data to kind of weaponize it against us.
Thank you, Caleb. All right, so I'm going to give Charlotte and Ron a moment to give us any final thoughts.
Go for Charlotte.
All right. I think trust is a big piece that is missing in this conversation. Although we have aspirations for AI to enhance the work that we're doing, we really need to also build trust with our communities, between all of these different stakeholders, because right now AI is, for a lot of people, feels as if it's being forced down their throat. And that is going to make them more apprehensive to using it. I also feel like AI is not the one size fits all fixer for everything. If we don't address our systemic issues, especially in our schools, AI is only going to do what we have seen during the pandemic when we went one-to-one and went completely tech. It only amplified and revealed even more to the public our deficiencies. So definitely addressing our educational debt is going to be important for any of these aspirations to actually take place. Yes, those are my final words.
Thank you, Charlotte. Okay, Ron.
Yeah, and I'll keep it real short. I know we're out of time. I think honesty and integrity. Let's just have an honest conversation about, the ethics and biases that exist, not only in AI, does it exist, period, but we can start with a conversation and really come to the table and see how we can address it. And I think that's what starts. And then having integrity, making sure that when things are developed, it's developed for the good of everyone. And I think those are the two words that will leave us with is honesty, integrity.
Thank you, Ron. I want to say thank you so much to Caleb, Ron, and Charlotte. This was a wonderful conversation, great presentation, Caleb. And thank you to you, our audience members, for joining us today. And there are some links in the chat to a survey, also to the YouTube series, and also to the PowerPoint presentation. Thank you, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.